Happy Friday. It's September 11th and kind of gray. Not raining, but misting. You can see the tin on the shed roof there is mostly wet. Probably not a good day to paint semi-trailer stuff with paint that cures by moisture. Gonna work on stuff in the shop, I think. It's supposed to do this all day, from what I can tell. I did a little bit of research on the four-wheeler deal, and there's a few things I need to check out. I was hoping that the problem was related to the petcock on the fuel, which is probably dark. Apparently, it has a prime function that somehow hooks into a vacuum line on the carburetor, and if you leave it in the prime position, it lets the fuel run down without the engine running. There's also, I think, a diaphragm or something inside there that if that fails, the same thing can happen, so that's still on the table. There potentially also could be something with the fuel pump. The fuel pump is up under the front back end behind the wheel here somewhere, it looks like, behind the plastic, so probably in not a very convenient spot to get to. But that also is vacuum operated, and if something goes awry with that, can potentially run gas down a vacuum line into the carburetor, into the crankcase. There also could be something going on with the carburetor itself, with like the float not seating right, that is letting gas gravity flow down from the tank into the engine. Fun times. Also going to try to work on the combine. I'm not sure how high a priority the four-wheeler is, to be honest, so I'm probably going to work on the stabilizer deal on the grain head first, get the bushings pressed into that, and probably make a shim to kind of take out some of the space in the one space between the tabs on the weldment that arm goes into. So let's get at it. All right, so we're looking at the carburetor underneath the seat here. I decided to do a little bit of troubleshooting on this thing, and that way if I find something I'm not sure about, I can think about it while I'm working on the combine stuff. So this is the line that goes to that petcock valve, which, as I understand it, basically just has a vacuum diaphragm that allows fuel to flow when there's vacuum on that, or if it's in the prime position, it will allow fuel to flow freely. So for running gas through the carburetor, that has to be not working, but it doesn't seem to be dripping presently, at least. I may need to pour some more gas in here. It looks like this rear vacuum line, so it attached to this front nipple for that's the petcock. This is the one that goes to the fuel pump that's up there on the frame underneath the plastics. So I'm going to pull it off and see if anything comes out of it, or if it looks wet inside. And then see what we find, I guess. It's also possible that we have a multi-part failure, in that, like, it's also possible that petcock is not totally failed and feeding fuel through the vacuum line, but if it's not shutting off like it should be, and the float is sticking in the carb, I think that would also cause it to put gas into the oil. So we may end up pulling the carb off and putting a kit in it, or at least looking it over. It looked like all of these parts, if I were to do fuel pump and petcock and carb kit, were not terribly expensive. But I'm trying to figure out exactly what's going on so that I know I get it fixed. It's not something besides those. I may have a theory. Haven't proven it yet, but my suspicion is that we maybe have a problem with the fuel pump. Because I think if the problem was here, we would be draining the tank completely, or at least down to the reserve level, and it looks like there's maybe a quarter tank left. And I think that correlates about to the height at which the fuel pump sits. It also seemed like this line that came off of that fuel pump fitting looks wet inside. It doesn't exactly smell like gas, but it also was pretty soft, like it pulled off easy, which would lead me to believe that it easily could have been exposed to some gasoline. The other one was stuck on there pretty good. So I'm suspicious that that's at least part of the problem. But the test is going to be I need to put a little bit more gas in and then see if it runs out anywhere, I think. So I'm going to go find a gas can and put a little bit in there and then check for drips after a bit. Okay. So we're set up with a piece of angle iron pushing on the bushing now to hopefully get it driven in the rest of the way so that the edge of the bearing is flush with that green arm. I'm kind of running out of a good place to put the camera, so I guess we'll try to do a wide angle view. I think we're going to go with that for now. I need to go get a measurement for figure out exactly how far that one needs to go in or how far it needs to stick through, because I think like this is much narrower than the bushing, and the bushing needs to end up somewhere in the middle like that. So I need to figure out where that is so that I know how far to push it and don't push it too far. Okay, we're started on this one. I was having trouble getting it to start straight in the press. So I actually ended up sort of tapping it maybe, I don't know, a quarter inch or so of the way in, just using the hammer and a wooden block. The surfaces on this one don't seem to be square with anything on the arm, since it's a rough casting and isn't machined. So it was hard to get the arm straight and then get the bushing pushing straight, but I think we're started pretty decent now. So we're going to get it up in the press and try to push it the rest of the way in. Still don't think we're pushing straight on that, and it's making me a little bit nervous. We're back moving again. I tried a couple things, but it ended up, this is the first successful one, which is basically just taking the metal out from underneath and putting a wood block under there so that there's sort of something that'll compress a little bit to kind of try to absorb or take that stress out the bottom, so that hopefully this and the bushing are square to each other still. So I think we're probably pretty close to even with the backside, so I'm going to probably pull it out here pretty soon, and then we'll have to get something underneath there to support the bottom side and then push it into the proper depth. Now we are to the precision guesswork part of this project, when I need to get this pushed through a little more, but not too much more. And it looks like I'm not under that arm as well as I need to be, so I'm probably going to have to take the tension off and reclamp. We moved a little bit, but I'm not gonna lie, trying to get this thing pressed through is being a real struggle. I've tried a whole bunch of different configurations to try to get a decent bite on that where I can push it to get it through and have clearance for the bushing to come through on the bottom side, and I'm not coming up with a lot of good options with the random junk that we have around here to use for spacers and stuff. I got it to move a fair amount using this old bearing race, but it seems like the internal diameter here is exactly the same as the outside of the bushing, so getting it lined up well enough that it'll go into that bore as it goes through is basically a pipe dream. I think basically flush with the cast at this point. And then I switched back to this larger bushing that I think is what I used when I pushed the old bearings out. And as you can see, we've got a nice giant crack in it now. It was cracked on the other side before. I think it's actually a bushing that goes on a bearing for like a gauge wheel and those cycloplanters, I think. So, not sure. I've got a bolt stuck through the bushing right now, which I was going to try to use to like sort of align that to the metal underneath, but I couldn't find anything to use for a spacer that would work. This was going to be taller so that the bolt wasn't long enough to stick through. So it looks like we're going to experiment some more and hopefully figure out some way to get this thing pressed in just a little bit more. Well, I may have got lucky. I think we managed to get that bushing going into this bearing race because we got it to pop down about 3 times or so, and I think we should be pretty close to where we need it to be to line up with the frame that it fits into. So it fit into the framework, so I think we've got that bushing pretty much exactly where it needs to be. I thought we were going to shim over this side a little bit, and we might still, but I'm not 100% sure about that yet. Gonna have to look a little bit closer. I think the bushing maybe is sticking out just a little bit on this side, so I may need to grind that bushing down just a touch and then do like a piece of 10 thou shim stock possibly. I'm jumping around a little bit this afternoon. It seems that I either managed to make these smaller when I put them in the arms or raised some ridges when I was pressing them in. Because the pins that went through the bushings before no longer do, and it seems like we measure a little bit undersized if we put the caliper on it. What I'm going to try to do is run a brake cylinder hone through there and try to take down just a little bit, but keep a nice surface finish hopefully. However, the glue that was holding the stones onto the brake hone had failed, so we re-glued that and kind of letting that set up a little bit. So I'm working on changing this belt that drives the shoe augers. So underneath the threshing cylinder and concave, basically there's a series of augers that carry all of the residue back to the separating stuff. It's a pretty long belt that has a lot of tension on it, and had some cracks in it, like that. So I decided it was maybe time to change that out. However, on this right side of the combine, that is the belt that is closest to the frame. So it has to go underneath this belt and this belt and this belt. Or, yeah. 2 of those might have been the same. Anyway, there's 3 belts here that it has to go under. So I had to loosen up all of those tighteners, and also went ahead and pulled this pulley off, so I needed to put a washer behind it to space it over to get the belt to stop rubbing against the rim. See where it's kind of rubbed paint off of there, and isn't rubbing on the other side. So a couple years ago, this pulley actually failed because it rubbed clear through the metal and the belt came off. So I've been kind of trying to keep an eye on that. We actually put a new bushing in that tightener, but it still seems to be running a little bit off to the side. So we're just going to put a washer in there and hopefully fix it that way. Okay, got the belt back on. I haven't tightened the tensioners back up yet, but everything is in position, I think. I screwed up and put the belt on the wrong side, or did the routing wrong over here the first time, so then I had to loosen this back up and switch the belt But looks good so far. I was just checking, so there's two of these pulleys on this belt, and this one was a OEM John Deere that was replaced in 2018, and at the same time I also did this one using an aftermarket. And this was an aftermarket from a pretty cheap source, but the bearing on it seems tighter than the John Deere one. And there could be differences in the load that they see, because this one's kind of moving on that tensioner arm, and that one I think is totally stationary. But nothing wrong with aftermarket parts in most cases, in my opinion. I also have some hose to replace the sight tube for the straw walker gear case. Basically there's a crankshaft inside here that goes from one side of the combine to the other that allows the straw walkers to move the residue back, and it drives off of this gearbox in this pulley. And Dad's replaced it once, but it seems like the plastic's getting hard again, and the risk you run is if that cracks in the field, your oil runs out, and then you have no lubrication, and you take out that gearbox, and it's expensive. So we've got a new piece of hose, tubing, the clear stuff, that I need to try to take that loose and get it switched out without dumping oil all over everything, which might be a trick. Slowly but surely, we're making progress. I got all the belts put back on, tightened up, checked tighteners on everything, basically. I hadn't actually checked that one, but it looks okay. I think that's all the spring tighteners on this side that I have to check. There's some others on the other side that I probably should take a look at now while I'm thinking about it. So basically the way that these work, they give you a gauge with which to set what the spring length is supposed to be, which F equals KX or negative KX, right? So basically, if you have the spring of a known stiffness compressed to a given length, then you know what the force is there, and that should equate to belt tension. It looks like that one may have loosened up. That's the brand new belt, so it may be kind of getting seated into the pulleys. Probably gonna have to kind of watch that one a little bit when we first start out anyway, so I might tighten it down a little bit more, or I might just wait until I run it outside the shop a little bit and see if it runs in different. But everything's back together. Got the tubing replaced on that. Just need to close the thing. Apparently it must have a vent on the gear case, and this is airtight because whenever you pop it down it pushes the oil down, and then you can't tell what the level is for a while. But hopefully that's good to go. Got all the shields back on, so I think we're pretty well done with this project. I have not done anything on the stabilizer arm yet, but that's going to be next as soon as I check those tighteners on the other side. Been working on this stabilizer arm with the brake hone and a little bit of emery cloth also, and we're making progress, but it's pretty slow going. I think probably part of the problem, well, there's a variety. This stuff is super hard, and normally brake cylinders are not necessarily hardened, I wouldn't say. So I think probably getting much abrasive action is difficult, especially when you're starting with a smooth surface. I think that this brake hone is not really designed for this small of diameter bore, because it seems like when you get it done in about that range is where I'm running, and it seems like about there is where the spring tension actually works, and then it sort of falls off as you get smaller. So I don't know that it's necessarily like squeezing out on those honing stones like it should be, or to the extent that it should be. And since I have a little bit of material that I need to remove, it's pretty slow going. I suspect there could be some issue not only with, not necessarily with it being undersized, but possibly being out of round if the hole in this was not perfectly round. And in hindsight, I probably should have checked that closer, and also done a little more measuring to see exactly what my tolerances were when I shoved those together, instead of just saying this is 7/8 and the old bushing was 7/8, so it should go in. Because it definitely seemed like the new ones pushed in a lot harder than the old ones pushed out. So I think that probably we can conclude that this is a slightly larger diameter, whether that's a tighter tolerance on this or a looser tolerance on the other side of the old ones, or if the old ones were a little bit undersized or whatever. Anyway, probably should have been a little bit more careful about that when I was putting stuff together, or before I put stuff together, because probably I could have taken this hone and honed the hole that the bushing is in, like on the arm, and that would have probably made a big difference in what I'm fighting now. But I think I'm going to have a real hard time pushing those out now that they're in there, especially now that I've got them where I want them. So I really want to try to get that 5 thou or so out of the inside if I can. I'm not exactly sure what my game plan is. I need to do a little bit of internet research, I think. My thoughts are some sort of a diamond hone, valve grinding compound on something, or a brake hone that's actually designed for a smaller diameter and more able to exert some force on that. It sounds like it's supposed to be halfway decent weather next week, so I have quite a bit of stuff that I want to get done, and need 2 or 3 days in a row to get the painting stuff done on the semi. So probably I'm going to scrap this for the time being, or maybe do a couple more little things before I take off, but probably about done for the night. It's about 6:30 now, and this might be one of the last weekends that I actually get before we start running harvest stuff, because I've got some other things going on next weekend. So at this point, I guess weekends are a little bit sacred. I really wanted to get that grain cleaner washed off and checked out a little bit more today, but it's been doing this the entire day. The slab had dried off at one point, but then it started raining harder and seems not to have let up, so I think that's probably going to be a project for another day as well. As I have torn apart now, you would think I would be able to tell what the problem was, but really can't. Can't find gas leaking anywhere. I put some more in the tank again, and got both of those vent lines hanging off still, and also pulled off the air box so I could check. There's kind of a breather thing for the crankcase that I had seen something online that sounded like there was a possibility that fuel could possibly get into that somehow, although I don't really know how. And got the carburetor pulled off, which actually just sort of came off with the air box. I don't know if that might have been part of the problem, if that front clamp was not tight where the rubber tube went onto the front side of the carburetor. Not really sure. But I couldn't find anything dripping. I took the air compressor and held my hand over top of the fuel cap, or the fuel cap hole with the cap off, and used the air gun to kind of pressurize the tank to hopefully expedite the leak so that I could tell where it was going. Found nothing. So I don't really like throwing parts at things, but I think I might in this case, because I don't really know what's going on and can't totally convince myself one way or the other, I guess we'll say. I think that petcock maybe is part of the problem, but it seems like that is most likely associated with something else, whether that's the float valve not shutting off right in the carburetor, or something with the fuel pump that's allowing the gas to come back that line, because that fuel pump line is still the one that seems like it was most wet inside. In any case, all this stuff is basically 20 years old, and I don't really know the history of it. So probably not crazy to just replace it preventatively anyway, because anything where you have vacuum valving that uses diaphragms usually tends to not age well when it sits in contact with gasoline 24/7. So I think that's probably what we're going to do, is get some parts ordered and try to get them here early next week, ideally, and then hopefully change some things out and see what happens. It's Saturday, September 12th, and got something figured out on this, I think. So I've tried a few different things with valve grinding compound, and what seems to be working the best is basically what used to be a hand pipe brush that I chopped the handle off of and chucked up in a drill. And I'm basically just using that with some valve grinding compound and a little bit of water, and I think taking off maybe 1,000th or so each pass. I mean, each round of new abrasive. But I have, this one's working pretty well now. I haven't done the second one yet, but we're back with enough tolerance that the pin will go through, and should be still tight enough that once it gets greased in there, it's not going to move enough to make a difference, hopefully. But I still need to do this one, and I think it was, well, I'm not sure. I thought it was tighter than that one, but I could be wrong on that. One of them was tighter than the other, and I don't remember which is which now. But I'm going to give this one the same treatment, and hopefully we'll have her ready to go back together probably Monday. I think we are in business here. So we slide through easily, but just a little bit of play. Hopefully enough that when I weld this, it doesn't distort so much that it binds badly. And this one I think should be about the same. Beautiful. And all it took was a $2 pipe thing and about $5 worth of valve grinding compound. And, well, $1 worth of a $5 tube, I should say.